finance or public sector economics. So we'll start with fiscal policy. I believe you remember we discussed one type of policy called monetary policy, which is a framework by which the monetary authority of a country controls money supply to influence some macroeconomic variables like inflation, exchange rate, economic growth, and others. So the government also has control over some of the macroeconomic policies by implementing a particular policy called fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is the use of government expenditure and taxation policies to influence some macroeconomic variables in an economy. So for the macroeconomic variables include inflation, exchange rates, economic growth, and others. So for instance, let me just give a typical example. You know, inflation, there is one type of inflation called demand pull inflation, which results as a which is as a result of so much money chasing few goods. So because there is an increase in demand for some goods, the price of these goods will increase. So if government wants to control inflation, what the government can do is it will increase taxes. By increasing taxes, it's taking money from the hands of the public so that the purchasing power of the public will reduce. As it increases taxes, demand for goods and services will go down, and then inflation will be checked. So this is a type of fiscal policy, right? So if you remember a budget is a financial statement that consists of expected or estimated revenue and also proposed expenditure. So government budget is a fiscal policy budget because it has two sides: government expenditure and also taxes, which is a source of government revenue, right? Okay, so we want to look at the types of fiscal policy. We have three types of fiscal policy. We have the neutral fiscal policy, the expansionary fiscal policy, and the contractionary fiscal policy. A neutral fiscal policy is a type of fiscal policy that results in a neutral effect, or more or less like no effect on the equilibrium income or the national income. So government can decide to increase government expenditure and at the same time increase taxes. The government expenditure will put a lot of money in the hands of the public, and taxes will also reduce the money in the hands of the public. So at the end, if it has no neutral effect on the national income, it is if it has a neutral effect or no effect on the national income, it is a neutral fiscal policy. The next type of fiscal policy is expansionary fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy results in an increase in the equilibrium income at the end. So if the government increases expenditure and probably decreases taxes, at the end you realize that there will be so much money in the hands of the public, because government expenditure, maybe payment of wages and salaries and all others, when they are increased, people get a lot of money. And when taxes are reduced, the people are empowered. Money is not taken from the hands of the public. So at the end, equilibrium income is increased. So that is expansionary fiscal policy. And we have contractionary fiscal policy. Contractionary fiscal policy is any fiscal policy that at the end results in a decrease in income, or a decrease in equilibrium income, or a fall in equilibrium income. So for instance, government can decide to reduce government expenditure. So as government reduces government expenditure, not much money will go into the hands of the public, and at the same time increases taxes. If the government increases taxes, what happens is that the little money in the hands of people will be taken from their hand, and that is contractionary fiscal policy. Contractionary fiscal policy. Contractionary fiscal policy is normally a fiscal policy that is used to control inflation, and expansionary fiscal policy is a fiscal policy that is used to cause economic growth. You know, real GDP, an increase in real GDP is economic growth. And if real GDP should increase, that means one of the expenditure should increase. Government can increase this expenditure. If you remember that real GDP is a function of consumption expenditure, investment expenditure, government expenditure, and net exports. So if government wants real GDP to increase, because it doesn't have direct control on consumption expenditure, it doesn't have direct control on investment expenditure, it can just increase government expenditure and even reduce taxes, so that consumption expenditure indirectly will increase and investment expenditure will increase. That is expansionary fiscal policy. Contractionary fiscal policy, if the government wants to control inflation, the government can increase taxes because inflation might have been caused by more money chasing few goods or increase in demand for goods and services. So the government can decide to increase taxes so that the purchasing power of people will go down, or money in the hands of the public will go down, and at the same time reduce government expenditure. It can intentionally decide not to increase wages and salaries. It can decide not to embark on developmental projects that will need the government to spend so much. By that, money will not go into the hands of the public to increase demand, so inflation is checked. Right. So it must be noted that the description of fiscal policy as neutral, expansionary, or contractionary is actually not based on the difference between government expenditure and taxes collected. It's actually based on the final effect on income brought about by the changes in government expenditure and taxation. So if income increases at the end, it's a expansionary fiscal policy. If income decreases at the end, it's a contractionary fiscal policy. And if income is not really affected, it's a neutral fiscal policy. A very important term I would like us to give attention to is the term crowding out effect. Crowding out effect is defined as the offset in aggregate demand that results when expansionary fiscal policy raises the interest rate and thereby reduces investment spending. Let me throw more light on this. If the government wants to spend, normally the tax revenue sometimes are not enough for government expenditure, so the government will resort to its banker. You know the banker of the government, do you remember? The banker of the government is the central bank. So the government will resort to its banker for funds. And if you remember, when we talked about monetary policy, one of the instruments of monetary policy we talked about was the OMO, open market operation. Open market operation is the central bank using treasury bills to control money supply in the system. So if the central bank wants to decrease money supply in the system, it will increase interest rates on treasury bill, and as interest rate on treasury bill is increased, it becomes a very good investment opportunity for the public. So people seeing that interest rate on treasury bill is up, they will decide not to have a lot of money on them. They will put their monies in treasury bill because the returns on treasury bill have gone high. That instrument the central bank uses, it is actually indirectly taking money from the hands of the public, and at the end it will give it to the government as a loan. So as government increases its demand for loans from its banker, what happens is the interest rate, which is the price of money, increases. And as interest rate increases, it affects all other interest rates. Interest rates on every loan, whoever is taking it, whether it's a government or private investors, all interest rates will increase. As government increases demand for loans, interest rates will increase across board. And when interest rates increases, it discourages investors or firms from borrowing from the banks because it becomes very expensive to borrow from the bank. So investment will go down. Investment going down as a result of the government implementing an expansionary fiscal policy or borrowing from the central bank is called the crowding out effect. The crowding out means that investment has been crowded out because of an expansionary fiscal policy of the government. Alright, so the next part we want to look at is public debt.